myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, my Republican colleagues are in the throes of regret that things they would like to have denounced are not in this bill. There'll be a certain amount of fantasy tonight on the floor of the House as they lament the existence of things that aren't here. One of the major bailout instruments, Section 13(3) of the Federal Reserve Act, was used during the Bush years to bail out not the institution but the creditors of Bear Stearns. But then it was used by a unilateral decision by the Federal Reserve with no congressional input in September during the Bush years of 2008 to provide substantial amounts of money to AIG. The bill before us today wipes that power out. There will be no more use of Section 13(3) to provide funds to any existing institution. There will be, as the Republican bill had also said, instead the ability to fund an instrument to which companies can apply if they are solvent in the midst of a national liquidity crisis. But there will be nothing like AIG. There is a fund in here for the FDIC to use if a financial institution has to be put out of existence because it had become too indebted and unable to meet its debts, and it was big enough so that its failure would cause the kind of systemic negative consequences that we saw from Lehman Brothers. Last year the problem was Lehman Brothers went under and the Bush administration felt they couldn't pay anybody and there was a crisis. So then AIG went under and the Bush administration said, well, we better pay everybody because we don't have the legal authority to pick and choose. We now end that dilemma. We say, and this is absolutely crystal clear in the bill, it says if an institution gets to the point where it cannot pay its debts and it is of such size that those debts threaten systemic negative consequences reverberating throughout the economy, it dies. There's no bailout. There's no continuation of that entity. It's a dissolution fund. It is put into receivership. There is a fund raised, it is true, by assessments on the financial institutions. And my Republican colleagues are far more solicitous than I of those institutions. They don't want to restrain their compensation, and they don't want them to have to contribute to expenses that may be incurred by their own irresponsibility. That's clearly a difference between us. We say that if the federal agency that is putting this out of business and takes it over, and yet there's a takeover of failing institutions who threaten by the size and complexity of their indebtedness to threaten the stability of the country. We take them over to put them out of business. The shareholders are wiped out. The boards of directors are fired. These are all absolute conditions that have to be met. And it may be that in winding them down, some money has to be spent. You don't just walk in the next day and say, okay, the door's closed. That's irresponsible. We say it may take some money to wind them down, so we assess the business community that caused these problems in the whole for that. And we do say that if there is a need and there's a shortfall before, if one of these things happens before the fund is built up, money will be borrowed from the Treasury with an absolute requirement of repayment in this fund. There are no taxpayer dollars that will be used. They will be lent in some cases, as has been lent in other cases, but they must be repaid, and there must be a repayment schedule. The assessments will continue until they are repaid. Now, one of the odd things is, and I apologize to my colleagues, the bill's too big. I don't know whether that means it was too much to read, or too heavy to carry, or some really short ones can't see over it when they're sitting down. I don't know what the problem was. This notion that the value of a piece of legislation is inversely related to its size is rather odd. But let me tell you how they managed to slim down, which I would like to do now that I'm through with all this, but I'll have to stop my diet next week. How do they slim it down? They don't do anything in their bill about executive compensation. I agree, we spent some pages saying that the kind of bonuses and large payments to take risks and not be penalized if they fail, we have language in here to stop that. They don't. Save some pages. We say, let's ban the kind of subprime loans that got this country into so much trouble. We have a lot of language in here to ban subprime loans. They don't. Save some more pages. We do regulation in other ways that they don't do. They don't have registration of hedge funds. They don't have requirements on private advisors. They don't have anything about a whole lot of things. So it is true, if you avoid subjects, you shrink the size of the bill. By the way, as to the size of the bill, this didn't come, and one of the things, sometimes it's what's not said that's relevant. You haven't heard any complaints today, and I appreciate that, about the process. We began marking up the elements of this bill before the summer recess. We have had a large number of hearings. We have spent over 50 hours in actual markup debate on this bill. There have been hundreds of amendments offered, dozens of amendments accepted from both the Republican and Democratic sides in many days of markups. It has been very thoroughly vetted. It was made public and available. So I'm sorry that they had to read a lot of pages about things they don't want to read about. They don't like to be reminded of compensation abuses. They don't want to hear about subprime, but we do. We want to stop it. So there is no bailout fund. The bailouts of AIG and Bear Stearns, not possible, illegal under this bill. If a company fails, it will be put to death. Yeah, we have death panels, but they got the death panels in the wrong bill. The death panels are in this bill, and we will spend the money to get rid of them in ways that will minimize damage, money that will come from the financial community. Now, we heard it's going to have a restriction on credit. Well, it's true, many of them were opposed to the credit card bill. Many voted for it. The National Federation of Independent Business supported the credit card bill. They say there's a credit czar. That one is too odd to put any meaning behind. I'd like them to point to the sections that do it. Maybe they can, if it's too much to read all at once, they could divide it up. Like there's 177. If they each read 8 pages, I think they could get the whole bill done. Maybe they could then find a credit czar in there. I can't. We do say that if you're identified by the Systemic Risk Council as over-leveraged and you're big, we will step in and tell you, as the gentleman from Pennsylvania's amendment said, you're too big. Raise your capital. That's a credit czar. Maybe when someone would have told AIG a couple of years ago, stop selling those credit default swaps that you can't back up because mortgages that you are insuring against loss can lose money. Maybe they think that's a credit czar if you tell AIG, don't do it. Because nothing in their bill, zero in their bill, would have interfered with AIG's recklessness. There's not a word in here that would have done that in terms of the over-leveraging of AIG, nor of the subprime loans that were there. So, yeah, the lack of regulation over many years allowed big problems to grow up, and it takes a fairly comprehensive bill to do it. We have been working on this bill for literally months. We have had days and days and days of hearings. We have voted on it. We have amended it. It's been available. So I would hope they would stop complaining about the size. I would hope they would deal with the substance. But the real substance of this bill, not a bailout that does not exist. I wait for someone to read me the sections that show that there's taxpayer money that can go to keep a failing institution going. There absolutely is not. And I would like them to tell me, do they think we should ever do anything about subprime loans, anything about executive compensation, anything about hedge funds, about any of these other things? So, yeah, here is the situation. Years of an absence of regulation, both an absence of law and an absence of will to regulate, mostly under Republican rule, but with some Democratic complicity, led to the largest crisis in recent memory since the Depression. They talk about job loss. As I said before, what a terrible day January 21st was. Apparently, we had a wonderful economy up till January 20th. Barack Obama took power, and millions of jobs disappeared retroactively. A deficit sprung up that had not been there. Bailouts were retroactively pushed back to September. The major factor in jobs loss was this terrible crisis. What we do for jobs is to say, you will not be allowed, once again, the financial irresponsibility of some in that community who get us into trouble. And the Republican proposal is very clear. Do not interfere with the ability of an AIG or a Lehman Brothers or a Citicorp or Countrywide or any of those other financial entities. Do not prevent them from doing again what they did before. If and when they have done such a bad job that they're collapsing, then let them go bankrupt and don't do anything to deal with the consequences. Let's have another Lehman Brothers. We say no. Let's try to stop them from getting there. If they do get there, yes, we will put them out of business, but in a more orderly way. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlemen.